So it's 11:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with today's session. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kristen Allen and I work for the City of Decatur as the Affordable Housing Fellow. Thank you also to today's participants, panelists, and facilitators as we begin the second of 3 community-focused conversations to discuss a specific recommendation of the Affordable Housing Task Force to increase the supply of affordable housing within Decatur's neighborhoods by allowing duplex, triplex, and quadplex construction in addition to single-family homes. Our first session was last week wherein Mayor Garrett gave a warm welcome, and I'm here today to welcome everyone and to show you a few slides about where this conversation started and why we are where we are. Okay, so these are some pictures I've taken around the neighborhood of different multi-family established duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes within Decatur's neighborhoods. So these exist on many of the different streets in Decatur, and you can see that a lot of these are have been made into existing homes. We call this type of housing missing middle, and the definition of missing middle is a range of house-scale buildings with multiple units compatible in scale and form with detached single-family homes located in a walkable neighborhood. Duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes and small apartment buildings are all missing middle housing types, and their densities fall between a single-family home and a larger multi-family development. So Decatur missing middle housing, why now? This conversation actually started back in 2008 with the Affordable Housing Study, where the participants of this study indicated that no community has proven successful built solely on single-family development. Next was the 2010 strategic plan, which called for allowing smaller homes and encouraging other creative housing in single-family neighborhoods. In 2017, the Oakhurst for Everyone report echoed this by talking about ensuring the availability of diverse and affordable housing and to provide for a variety of housing types and prices. 2018, Decatur had a housing summit report, which talked more specifically about these forms in single-family neighborhoods, the duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes to provide subtle workforce housing. In 2020, the Affordable Housing Task Force report went a step further and actually made a recommendation to increase the supply of affordable housing options by allowing duplex, triplex, and quadplex construction in current single-family zoning. And the current 2020 strategic plan, which we call Decatur 2030, talks about input from the community for ambitious outcomes for housing and other initiatives throughout the city, and to ensure that each neighborhood provides its fair share of affordable housing. So this conversation has gone on for a long time, and this is the next step in this process. So why are we looking specifically at Decatur's neighborhoods for solutions to affordable housing? This goes to speak to our zoning. The citywide zoning in Decatur, 70% of the zoning is single family and 30% is other types of zoning. And if you look closer at Decatur's neighborhoods, 90% of the neighborhoods are zoned for detached homes and only 10% have other housing types. So other cities are going down this road as well. Some have passed initiatives and others are looking closely at it. and discussing with their communities. So we'll look at what a few other cities are doing, and we'll talk tonight about what is right for Decatur. So Raleigh is looking at by right duplexes and townhomes. Minneapolis was one of the first cities to initiate this, with allowing duplexes and triplexes, and also allowing existing homes to add up to 2 units within their home. Portland is probably the most aggressive, where they added up to 4 homes on a lot. They also decreased the allowable home size and eliminated parking requirements, which are 2 things that can help affordability. Austin also allows duplexes now, but removed a common wall requirement. So there can be 2 smaller separate home type duplexes on a lot, and they also reduced parking requirements. Charlotte is pending to allow duplexes and triplexes. California is a statewide initiative, which now allows up to 4 homes on an existing lot. California has put in some requirements, such as the home must be owner occupied for 3 years, no short-term rentals are allowed, and no more than 1 parking space per unit. And they've actually disallowed parking requirements if it's located within 1/2 mile of transit. Atlanta, the discussions are still pending, but they're looking at adding up to 3 units on a lot, which would be a duplex plus an ADU, and 8 to 12 units if it's located within 1/2 mile of transit. They're also looking to remove parking minimums and to put in affordability requirements for the 8 to 12 units apartment buildings. So how would this recommendation help Decatur's affordable housing crisis? There is no one solution for affordable housing. So this recommendation is one of 23 within the Affordable Housing Task Force report that combined can help with our affordable housing. One thing that this will do is help diversify new construction housing. So it would enable duplexes, triplexes, and quadplex construction, and not only single family homes. And that would enable residents at all stages of life to live in Decatur. This would also enable neighbors to diversify their residents by dividing a home into multi-units, which could help existing residents in their home stay in their homes by providing income while also creating a new rental unit for someone that needed to rent within the neighborhood. The policy would also enable nonprofit developers, for example, the newly formed Decatur Land Trust, to have more flexibility with homes that they acquire. And the Decatur Land Trust focuses on affordable home ownership and can also participate in affordable rentals. And the policy overall allows more housing choice within Decatur's neighborhood. So what can we expect in this session? The policies are not yet written. So these sessions are to solicit input from our community to shape the policy recommendations that eventually go to the City Commission. The session will start with a video, and our panelists will answer pre-selected questions. Then we'll go into breakout rooms for an opportunity for community input. We'll report out for each group afterwards, and we'll have time for additional questions at the end of the session. There is more information available at our website, including a lot of history on zoning in Decatur at decaturga.com/affordable housing. And the website also includes a survey, a hotline phone number that is starting today for additional feedback, and contact information for any further questions. I'll leave you with a couple more pictures of some existing missing middle homes within Decatur. And we will go ahead and start our video.
The Decatur we know and love today is the result of over 4 decades of planning and follow through. And by many measures, a highly rated school system, a destination downtown, a strong real estate market, that work has been successful. But success can be a double-edged sword. With limited land and a desirable quality of life, prices rise, often well beyond the reach of workforce and middle-class people.
We're both Emory professionals. We have a growing family. We're working 40 hours a week and still kind of having trouble finding a location where we can actually buy or purchase in the city of Decatur. We kind of find ourselves renting around the city, but we would love to be, here.
So I teach in city schools in Decatur. This is my 15th year teaching in the district. I taught at Oakhurst and now my 5th year at Renfro. I love it here and I live where I teach. I love living in this community. I walk everywhere and I ride my bike, but it's difficult. I've lived in several different rentals in the district. I've lived in garage apartments, I've lived in duplexes, I've lived in standalone houses, and every year it is more and more difficult to find something that's actually affordable. And that's actually my current situation right now. We've been living in a rental for about 4 years and recently found out that once again, we have to move.
I have served the community of the City of Decatur for 11 years as an officer. 4 of those years, I was able to rent in the Oakhurst area. After renting for 4 years, my family and I decided we wanted to purchase a home. And as we looked around Decatur, it was obvious to us that we could not afford to live in the city, so we had to look elsewhere. You know, I just believe this fact that I work and serve the community and serve this city, that it is very unfortunate that we're not able to purchase homes in the area in which we serve.
I have lived in Decatur and worked in Decatur for over 25 years. My husband and I have raised our children here. We've grown to love this neighborhood. We really want to stay right in this area. We want to have a little yard, a little dirt to play in. We want to stay close to the neighbors that we are so close to emotionally. And we're getting worried because there just don't seem to be many affordable options that suit our needs.
The residents and staff in the city of Decatur have been talking about the importance of affordable housing for over a decade. And during this time, home prices and rents have only gone steadily upward. This problem is pressing and it's not going away. That's why in the summer of 2019, the city convened the Affordable Housing Task Force and asked us to study the problem and make recommendations about how the city can best address it. Many of these recommendations are focused on our city's neighborhoods and how to make them more economically inclusive.
Historically, traditional neighborhoods have addressed economic diversity with a variety of housing types: single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and quads, even granny flats and small townhomes. Decatur's been no exception and has featured many of these through the years, some of which remain. They're what's now called the missing middle, smaller scale buildings distinct from the larger multifamily projects we see downtown in their transit that are compatible with single-family homes. This is Drexel Avenue in Decatur's Lenox Place neighborhood. Walking down it, you'd likely experience it as a pleasant single-family street, but you'd be mistaken, because hidden in plain view among the homes of this quiet 4-block stretch are 40 naturally occurring missing middle housing units at varying levels of affordability. Such integration was once commonplace in Decatur, and the duplexes, triplexes, and quads we see today were all built or retrofitted in years past as a legal and encouraged solution to the housing needs of the day. But in 1988, they were outlawed in response to challenges we now find unfamiliar: disinvestment and absentee ownership. Today, our pressing need for more affordable housing exists in stark contrast to the 1980s. What was once a seemingly practical response to decline now exists as an artificial economic barrier, a new form of redlining that prevents all but the highest income households from living in Decatur's neighborhoods. This need not be our destiny or our legacy. We can choose a different path. Among the many recommendations of the Affordable Housing Task Force report are efforts to once again allow these more inclusive missing middle housing types that were once commonplace in Decatur. With additional housing options scaled comparably to single-family homes, but configured to include smaller dwellings, we can help overcome the policies that have contributed to Decatur's loss of racial and economic diversity. We can create space intentionally for workforce and middle-class people currently priced out of our neighborhoods. In response to the recommendations put forth by the Affordable Housing Task Force, the city is currently at work on a proposed zoning update with the potential to make our neighborhoods the welcoming and economically diverse places we want them to be. To do so, they'll need you, your input, and your support. This is our opportunity to shape our neighborhoods according to our values, where service workers and young couples are just as welcome as those of increased means, where teachers and police officers and freelancers can share the neighborhood with lawyers and investment bankers, and where our long-term residents can downsize to more manageable and affordable space without leaving the neighborhood and the neighbors they've come to love. Let your voice be heard. Learn more, get involved, and encourage our city leadership to make this bold investment in a more inclusive future.
Okay, so next I'm going to introduce our three fabulous panelists for today who will answer some questions, some pre-selected questions. So first we have Libby Egnor, who's been a Decatur resident for 20 years. She works at Emory University as the Associate Dean for the Undergraduate Business Program. And Libby served on the Affordable Housing Task Force and has continued to work with the Education Committee of that group since its formation in 2019. She and her husband live in Winona Park in the Mac District with their 2 sons. Dr. Sarah Patnod has been an affordable housing researcher and advocate since 2012. In her current role as project manager at Tapestry Development Group, Sarah manages affordable housing development and rehabilitation. Sarah has a PhD in urban history and a certificate in planning and economic development from Georgia State University, where she studied affordable housing policy. Sarah volunteers her time on advisory councils for projects including the House ATL and statewide housing policy, and chairs the Coalition for a Diverse DeKalb, a grassroots organization working to advance equity and diversity through affordable housing. And thirdly, Maria Pinkleton is the Public Relations Director for the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities, where she manages the organization's digital media and their statewide storytelling project and organizational diversity, intersectionality, and inclusion initiatives. In Decatur, she has served on the Lifelong Community Advisory Board, the Decatur Education Foundation Board, the Affordable Housing Task Force, and the Senior Homestead Exemption Commission. Maria lives in Decatur with her family. So thank you to our three panelists. And I'll start with the first question for Libby, but anyone else can jump in if you would like to add anything. There were several recommendations by the Decatur Affordable Housing Task Force to add supply of affordable housing to Decatur. Why were zoning reforms for duplex, triplex, and quadplex put forth as one of those recommendations?
Thanks, Kristen. And again, please, anyone can jump in to help with this answer, but I think it's important to understand that this is one of many recommendations that the task force came up with. It was over 40 people doing work over the course of a year, I think, and really digging deeply into issues that were happening in Decatur. One of the things that really stood out to me as somebody who's lived in Decatur for 20 years is just the way that, so from 2008, to 2020, rents had increased 119%. Looking at things like the housing prices, average housing prices have gone up 72%. And when you look at the cost, the median value of a home in Decatur in 2018, it was at $667,000 and change, compared with Metro Atlanta, which is $319,000. So I think that those numbers really tell a story of a group of people, a large group of people, myself would have been included, if it were real time now, being priced out of Decatur. And so I think that for people looking at options in Decatur, they just have been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. 70% of the land in Decatur is residentially zoned. 90% of that land is for single family homes. And I think when you look at something like triplexes and duplexes as one of many tools in a toolkit, you will see that this is a great option for our city moving forward. Obviously, every little bit helps. Every small thing we can do to layer on and provide more affordable housing is going to be important. But I think that really is one of the reasons we're talking about this issue today, because we see it as a next logical step in taking action on trying to find more affordable housing in Decatur.
Thank you, Libby. And so our next question is for Sarah. What do you know about past housing policies and why these multi-units were disallowed in neighborhoods in Decatur?
Sure. So one thing that we know first off is that this is not something that just happens out of nowhere, right? Zoning policy is something that's intentional and it's something that changes. So until the late 80s, Decatur allowed different kinds of housing to happen in its single family neighborhoods. So you would see these duplexes, triplexes, small multifamily happening throughout a neighborhood. And if you think about your favorite neighborhoods and places that you like to walk around, it's probably those same places because it adds vibrancy and avoids that kind of cookie cutter feeling that we associate with the suburbs versus somewhere like Decatur. So in the 1980s, though, Decatur was starting to struggle with some issues with, landlords who weren't keeping up their properties. And there were some questions around predatory lending and discriminatory lending practices and all of these other kinds of big systemic forces that are going on. And so in 1988, the city of Decatur did change their single family zoning rules to say that there could not be these small multifamily, things like duplexes, triplexes in those single family neighborhoods. So we can't really go back in time, and it's not really our place to second guess why city council in 1988 decided to do that. The fact is that they did. But now we have an opportunity to learn from that and say, is this what's still appropriate for Decatur? And Decatur now is extremely, extremely different than Decatur of 35 years ago. And so that's why it's appropriate now to be reconsidering this and say, what do we want from our neighborhoods? Do we want that vibrancy? Do we want that feel of a diverse community that allows for multitudes of kinds of people to be able to live there? And so that's why, this is something that we should be looking at again, rather than just sticking to how we did things in the 80s.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So our next question is for Maria. What do you think of Decatur's current housing and the trajectory of housing in Decatur over time?
Thanks for that question. Well, when my husband and I and our son moved here in 2011, the asking price for our house was less than half of what the current value is. So appreciation and equity are good until you feel all the effects of it. And within 10 years' time, that has meant higher taxes for us, and sadly, the lockout of many people who make our same income and who would like to live here. I feel as if we made it into Decatur home ownership, like when there were 15 minutes left on the affordable housing clock, and boop, right, the bell rung and we were some of the last people to get in. The affordable housing problem is not just a Decatur problem, but I do think that it's one we have the ability to solve. I think that Decatur is now at a tipping point, and if we don't move aggressively to ensure diverse housing types in our city, the opportunity to do so is going to be lost forever. And while increasing the number of workforce priced units in larger apartment structures is important, I think that another crucial element is making our dream of middle income priced housing a reality, of making that housing a reality, is preserving our existing quad, triplexes, and duplexes. If they aren't identified and preserved, those will quickly be leveled to make way for more $1 million homes. And I know that when we initially started work in the affordable housing task force, we were looking at maps where those houses had been, several of them have been identified, and they were spread all throughout the city. They blend in into so many different neighborhoods. And in addition to preserving those properties, more of them need to be constructed in areas that currently contain predominantly single family homes. And it's been proven that those types of homes, the quads and the duplexes, are visually appealing, and they blend in seamlessly with the existing homes on the streets. If you have the chance, visit the Decatur Affordable Housing webpage, and you can see examples of existing multi-unit housing in Decatur that is architecturally appealing and would make wonderful residences for young families, grandparents looking to downsize, and young professionals looking for starter homes. In addition, for us to make significant and lasting change in our diverse housing landscape, we need to pull all of the levers that are at our fingertips. And by that, I mean, we need to support senior tax exemptions. We need to support revising zoning and ADU laws. We need to make sure that the Decatur Land Trust is funded adequately so that we can benefit from the full potential of such an entity. Most importantly, I think we need to squash all the thoughts of not in my backyard or the NIMBY way of thinking through educational opportunities like this one. If we don't have everyone in this city on the same page, we will never be willing to make the bold and innovative moves that it's going to take for us to solve the issue.
Thank you, Maria. So our next question is for Libby. With the population growth in Metro Atlanta over the past years, more discussion is happening around both affordable housing and the housing jobs mismatch that often occurs in metropolitan areas. Can you talk about what a housing jobs mismatch is and how it affects the city?
Sure, thank you. I was really surprised to learn that only 4% of Decatur residents actually work in Decatur. I somehow thought more of my teachers for my sons, or the police officers or folks working for the city of Decatur were more likely to live in the city than that. But actually, the problem that exists is that there's a real mismatch between sort of the jobs and the pay scales for the jobs of people who work in Decatur and the ability to live in Decatur and pay for housing. A lot of Decatur jobs cluster around retail and restaurant industry. They also are educational services, public administration, and those jobs tend to be between 50 and 80% of the area median income. But of course, that's not who can afford to live in Decatur. We have seen, again, looking at the area median income, finding limited amounts of housing for either renting or owning for people who are in those, in that bracket. And so what ends up happening is you have all kinds of traffic, because no one who's working in the city is living in the city. So they are commuting, driving in. If you have, people like in industries that like restaurant or retail, they're working late at night, and then public transportation isn't necessarily available to them at night. So again, relying on other forms of transportation, or you'll see business owners having trouble with their workforce, having trouble staffing people to work late shifts because they don't have a way to get home. You see teachers who are rushing to try to beat traffic instead of being able to participate in after school programs or evening activities. And you see people who might take a job in the city of Decatur a little reluctant to do so because of the traffic, because it's difficult. And of course, for the people who live in Decatur and have to work somewhere else, that also impacts their traffic. So, the commercial downtown has continued to struggle after the effects of COVID. Getting employment back up and going full capacity is already difficult enough. The fact that have no chance of living in the city if they want to take a job in Decatur is just that mismatch that we're seeing between what is available and the kinds of jobs that are available in Decatur. So it definitely impacts all of us when we think about, we want this community where we can walk to stores and shops, but if we can't staff those places, those restaurants, it's a lot less likely that we're going to patronize them, and then it becomes a cycle of businesses being challenged to actually even operate in Decatur.
Thank you, Libby. So this next question is for Maria. Do you think this policy change would increase equity in Decatur, and how?
So I definitely think that this policy change would increase the opportunity for equity in Decatur. I actually think that housing is the biggest way for us to impact the amount of equity we have in our city. If people can't live here, then they're not going to be represented here, period. If you aren't sharing community with people from all walks of life, then you will never have the opportunity to get to know and understand people from all walks of life, right? Teachers would love to live in the neighborhoods where their students live. We need to make housing that's affordable for teachers. People living with disabilities and their family members would love to call Decatur home, but because of the additional costs that many families face with when it comes to healthcare, they financially have no way into our housing market. I love my neighbors who are senior citizens, but I know that when they can no longer afford to live here, we will lose their experienced and valued voices in our community dialogues. To make housing available to people from all walks of life increases the chances that the policies we support with our votes are ones that are good for all people. And it means that our neighbors who run for office will represent a larger pool of opinions and ideas, which create greater innovation and greater opportunity for equitable outcomes. Just look at the young voices, diverse voices that spoke out to have the Confederate monument removed from the square, and the young diverse voices who spoke out to have the cannon removed from the square, right? Look at the diverse voices that spoke out from the Student Coalition for Equity and helped lead yesterday's equity forum for those running for school board and for commission seats. Having equity in housing means that the conversations in our classrooms will take into account the diverse experiences and perspectives of the teachers and the students and everyone at the schools and in the community. And when that happens, the kids that graduate from our schools are ready to face the world, no matter what career or post-secondary educational path they take. They will be informed by that well-rounded development in their youth. Those students will have graduated from an educational system that supported and uplifted all of the students. And I think that this means that in those classrooms, probably my child will not be the only non-white student in the room. And that is something that my husband and I, along with many other parents like us, would greatly appreciate. Having equity in housing creates more opportunities for diversity in arts and culture, like we saw in such events like Pan-African Festival, Art for the People, and Placita Latina that I believe is still going on. I think that through equity in housing, we are able to create a community that has equity in the business and the services that are offered. And that ensures that regardless of ability or income or gender, everyone will feel welcome.
Thank you, Maria. So our next question is for Sarah. Some common concerns related to density are traffic, school enrollment, and property values. Can you speak to these concerns?
Absolutely. So, I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to conversation around density and affordable housing is people's fears are real and they are valid, but they're not backed up when we look at the actual data. So I'm going to kind of go in reverse order. So the first question around property values, people are often afraid that if we have affordable housing, that it will affect their own property values, which of course is a big piece of the reason why people are moving into Decatur, because they think that they're going to be somewhere that their home value is going to keep going up. But every study that we've had has shown that affordable housing does not decrease property values as long as it's included throughout an area. So yes, if you concentrate affordable housing into an area that's already declining, property values will continue to go down. But if we build a community that has affordable housing baked in throughout the community, everybody is going to benefit from that. And then around the question of school enrollment. So it's often a question, anytime we're talking about increasing the number of households, there's questions about school enrollment. And in my line of work, I build multifamily, and we hear this all the time, that you're going to end up overcrowding the schools. But studies are showing again that traditional single family homes have 2 to 3 times the number of school-age children as those who live in multifamily housing. And when we talk about these smaller housing types, duplex, triplexes, quadplexes, they're smaller, they have fewer bedrooms than what the new single family large construction that we're seeing. So that's going to be attracting different kinds of residents, people who are empty nesters, who are single, who are young couples that don't have kids. And it offers an entry point for people who would eventually like to be part of this community to come into it. And that includes people who may or may not have kids. But multifamily housing is not the place that we're seeing our enrollment numbers continue to climb in Decatur. And I think Libby handled the question of traffic beautifully, that if you want a community that has the kinds of great goods and services that Decatur has, you're going to have a workforce that comes in. And if you can't, if those people can't live here, if your baristas can't live here, if your shop workers can't live here, if your servers can't live here, they're going to have to drive. And so if you want to decrease traffic, actually having density with a mix of housing types and affordability levels is the way to do it. And then finally, I want to add one that wasn't on your question, Kristen, but the other conversation that's coming up a lot right now is around density and tree canopies. So if you want to protect tree canopies and green space, density is actually the way to do it. If you allow continued single family construction on large lots and you're knocking down the entire all the trees that are on the lot and you're just putting back a couple because now most of it is taken up with your house, that has a major impact on your tree canopy. Now, if we can densify, if we can get multiple units onto a smaller footprint, then that is the way to actually preserve the green space in the community. So there's this constant conflict where people try to pit green space against affordable housing, and those are only in conflict if we let them be in conflict. So, I think that a lot of these misconceptions and concerns are real, but it's just a question of people being able to have the conversation and find out what the reality is once these policies are put into place. And Decatur isn't, at the forefront of this. We're not the ones who are first trying it out and doing it. for the very first time. Because again, as we've seen, up until the 1980s, this is how Decatur was built. And all these other cities that we can learn from, and we can see what's working and what's not working. So a lot of these concerns, they're real, they're valid, and they're things that need to be planned around, but they shouldn't be stumbling blocks for being able to make an inclusive community.
Thank you, Sarah. And so our last question for our panelists is for Libby. If this policy is not implemented, what might that mean in terms of housing in Decatur?
Well, I think that, Maria's point about, being in the last 15 minutes before the door closed, we feel that, and we see it again and again. Communities go through life cycles. They go through, different changes. Sometimes they can be in decline. They can be, being gentrified. We are at that gentrification stage, and we need tools that really help us to slow the brakes on what's happening in our city. I think that, the pendulum can swing. And I really believe that if we get to a place where people cannot afford to live here and more young, vibrant people who want to be part of our community can't join, we will stagnate. And there will be a painful period when Decatur, maybe moves into another life cycle that we are not really excited to be part of. So I think this is our way to kind of keep Decatur vibrant and healthy by changing some of the rules so that we don't move into another stage that we're not anxious to be part of.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you to all of our panelists for answering these questions. And our next step is to go into breakout rooms for community input and discussion around these topics. So Renee will be assigning you a breakout room. So just click that when it comes up, and we will see you afterward. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start our report outs from each group, and I hope you enjoyed your time in your breakout sessions. I think Libby was going to start us off. Her group popped in first. So do you want to go ahead, Libby, and report out?
Thanks so much. And I already thanked my group members, but I can't say enough good things about the dialogue and how willing everybody was to engage. It was so appreciated, and we recognize we have work to do for sure. So thank you for that. I think that, the thing that I wanted to focus on were, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, but the last two questions in particular, the questions about if we adopt this policy, what are the positive and negatives, and then focusing on, what we should do going forward. So thinking about the positives for adopting the zoning regulations for triplexes, duplexes, quads, that it really builds a sense of community. We actually had one of our group members talking about living sort of in a quad housing situation right now, and that it really, that the kids walk to school together, that they have a sense of community in terms of like, if something goes wrong, they can rely on each other. And that is absolutely a real positive. From one of the members of our group was a business owner and said that, having employees who could live in Decatur would be such a positive, having sort of, young people in particular looking for their first professional opportunity in place of employment. They're not just looking for that job, they're also looking for an experience, and that would be like a real selling point. So that was another positive. And then of course, another positive was mentioned that, the hope that these units wouldn't just be for rent, but that they could also be sold as, a part of a duplex, so that, again, people who were really interested in purchasing, not just renting, could have an option. And then I think some of the negatives people were concerned about, being priced out. So, I mean, even a brand new duplex and you're buying one half of it might be out of price range for people who are really interested in owning their own home and living in Decatur. Another negative concern, that could come of this is the perception or the idea that we would, be trying to dictate who could live in the community. And I think there was a lot of thoughtful commentary on sort of having it be not necessarily seen as a social engineering experiment, but rather, educating people to really think about like why this is valuable and why this is important. And then, really trying to make sure that, that people who while the community's input is important, the community can't be the only ones who are inputting, because of course, you do get, as we worry about Maria talking about not in my backyard. So we don't want it to only be one or the other. And they were worried that could come into play. The second question that we really focused on at the end, some things that we could do to mitigate the negative impacts of the missing middle. I think that there was just a big concern about not just affordable housing right now, but what will be affordable in 4 to 5 years, how quickly, the housing market has just gone up and up and up, and how that can be. So really looking at like longer term strategies was really something that people were interested in. Inviting different groups of people, different people at different ages and stages of life to really look at Decatur and look at this. Another idea was putting a hold on the demolition of homes that currently exist to build larger, bigger homes. That was a suggestion that we had in our group. So I think that there were a lot of great ideas, and I have a lot of notes that I will share with you after. But thank you to my group, just such a good, rich discussion, and I'm really grateful that they were willing to put their time in today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Libby, and to your group for that thoughtful discussion and all the feedback. It's really appreciated. Angela, do you want to go next with your report out?
I certainly can. All right. So our group, again, we had a great, rich discussion as well. And thank you to the group members. So in terms of the positives from, maybe developing this policy is the increased diversity. And we talked about racial diversity, socioeconomic diversity, but also the age diversity. Both more seniors in our community, whether they're coming in as new residents or keeping the ones that we have here and they might want to downsize. But then also recent graduates who might be wanting to return, or those young families, because without those age groups, we are missing out on those unique perspectives, the energy that they can bring to civic life. Those are important attributes that the positive attributes that could come from this. And then in terms of, the potential negatives from such a policy, just parking, providing the off-street parking. And then of course, like Libby had mentioned with her group, is the longer term strategies for the affordability of these units. Those prices continue to rise, whether it's for sale or rental, but how do we keep these units from going too far out of the reach of truly, workforce housing? And in terms of kind of mitigating the negative effects, we really focused on the parking and looking at giving credit for on-street parking, the linear feet, that's in front of that lot, giving credit for every 20 linear feet, giving credit for a parking space that might be on street. Also giving a reduction if the these types of homes are in close proximity to a transit station. Because those households may be more likely to be using transit or keep their car parked. And then the other thing that we talked about is kind of the balance of this. So if we are providing credit for on-street parking, we are reducing impervious surfaces on that lot. We're thinking about the stormwater goals for the city of Decatur, and also giving way to more green space and tree conservation if we're not requiring everything, all the parking to be on site. And of course, I'll ask, if I've missed anything from my group, they are welcome to chime in. So the last thing I will share, and this was brought up a couple of times, is that, right now we are seeing the demolition of a lot of the smaller, more affordable, attainable homes in our community. And the group expressed, wanting to see a moratorium on the demolition of those smaller, more attainable homes, so that we can figure out a strategy on how to protect those and keep those affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and to your group. That's some great feedback and great input as well. So let's go on to Leanne's group next.
So one of the first things that was brought up was the surprise about the history in Decatur and the redlining and all. And it was brought up that there was concern about Decatur has just become more and more homogeneous. And so things need to be done to deal with that. They really liked the vision of mixed housing, and they saw the big need for a citywide housing where folks from who work for the city are able to have housing in addition to other new residents coming in. There was also a great surprise at the 4% of the workforce housing. So that's something that really needs to be looked at. It was thought that there needs to be more balance, and that density and workforce housing would help with that. Also, there were some questions about how zoning codes were being enforced, and so that's something that we need to keep an eye on. One of the folks in my group has family members that were trying to buy a home, and were afraid that they wouldn't be able to do so, and even renting a home would be out of what they could do in Decatur. So there was a lot of concern about new folks coming in and being able to do that. And let's see. Also, in regard to mitigating it, we just need to make sure that we talk to each other, that we discover what it will be to make this good for everyone, and that it doesn't need to be something negative, that we can, if we talk to our neighbors who are concerned about it, try to stop the NIMBY attitude and get folks to look more at how can we make this good for everybody. And also to look out for some unsubstantiated fears that folks might have. Also, there was question about the school homestead exemption that's being proposed. And so there was concern that if it doesn't go through, might affect some affordable housing.
Thank you, Leanne, and to everyone in Leanne's group. So next we have Ryan.
Yes, we had a great discussion also. But we had Sarah agreed to do the report out, so I will refer to Sarah.
Yep, he tagged me in on it. Yes, we had a really great discussion in our group. In fact, about half of our group members were folks who can't currently afford to live in Decatur. So that was a great point of view to bring in. And then there was also recognition of those who do live in Decatur that it would be, nearly impossible to move into that situation now, that it was only a timing question. And I also want to highlight, and two, we had one member who is currently a renter in Decatur and would love to be able to buy her first house, but moving into home ownership means leaving the community that she's been a part of for the last 5 years. And how unfortunate it is not only that we've lost community members in the aggregate, kind of the general change that's happening, but that we have active community members who love all of these great things about Decatur, and moving up into home ownership should be a wonderful opportunity. And instead it's a point of pain because there isn't that kind of entry-level attainable housing for her to move into in Decatur. And so we talked a lot about the really great things that could come from this policy, that it could increase the inclusiveness and diversity and transparency, but also that Decatur is such a great place, and that bringing in new people who can benefit from Decatur's opportunities and helping make sure that people who are currently here can stay here is just positive all the way around. It's good for the community, it's good for the schools, it's good for the city government, it's good for the local businesses. And so that was really the kind of the cheerleading section coming out of our committee or our breakout group, that we would love to see this policy come into place.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to that group. And the last group report out we have is from Eileen's group.
Hello, everyone. So like in our last meeting, I'd like to start by discussing question number one briefly, which is, what was home after you moved out? What did you consider home after you moved out of your parents' house? And again, they were all smaller. They were apartments with roommates, or a duplex, or in one case, a small cottage, a 500 square foot cottage. So all of these, smaller housing types, that allowed them to, save for their next phase in life, for a larger home, or even to purchase their first home. So I always like to start with that one. But so our discussion revolved a lot around the concern of maintaining affordability even with this new density. How would we keep density from, how do we keep these new units affordable? What are the incentives, or what are the things that we could do to make sure that these new units aren't just luxury priced? So we're really not solving much of the affordability puzzle at all with this particular thing that we're doing here with duplexes and triplexes and quads. And there was also talk about parking. We did talk about parking. Interestingly, it wasn't just about parking with new multi-family type of units, but just parking in general. And there was discussion about residents of single family homes that have in one case 4 cars, and that kind of thing. So there was a conversation about parking, and I know it's been mentioned in the other groups, so I won't really go on with that one. There was a brief mention about how do we also prevent the larger housing, although this isn't really the forum for that. We're really talking about the duplexes, but there was a brief mention about possibly limiting floor area ratio for that. But I think the biggest question that came up, and I know we've kind of had internal discussions about this, so I hope that someone can speak more to this, is if we do go back to allowing these types of units, how do we stop, how do we stop going back to pre-1988? There's a reason why we got rid of duplexes at that time. So if we allow them again, how do we prevent going back to that kind of city? So that is, and there was definitely some positive things that were discussed as well, making the city more vibrant with more different types of people, and also increasing what's already, we're blessed to be a very walkable city, but definitely increasing that walkability was definitely a positive that came up. So with that, I will stop speaking.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you so much to everyone today for providing this input. I know Eileen left us with a question that we can go ahead and answer, but I wanted to conclude the session, and if anyone wants to stay on for a few extra minutes to ask extra questions, you can, I don't know if Renee will unmute everyone or if you can just raise your hand, but if some of the facilitators or panelists can stay around, if possible, we can have any unanswered questions discussed. And also I'll be running a hotline. It's the numbers listed on the website, decaturga.com/affordable housing. My email is on there for contact. And there's also a sign up for the last session, which will be on November 11th. So if you can spread the word, we're really trying to get as much participation in the community as possible for our last session, which is the evening of November 11th. So thank you again. And I hope everyone has a great day, and feel free to stay on if you have any lingering questions.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
And if we want to start answering the last question that Eileen brought up about how we keep from going back to the pre-1980s Decatur, I don't know if anyone on the call wants to jump in and start answering that.
Well,
what does that mean?
This is Elka, and I would say I think there's two.
Elka, first, do you mind describing, restating the question and just describing what you think it means to go back to pre-1980s?
Well, I think that the as I understood what Eileen was saying, it's not necessarily saying inherently that we don't want, although I think this is probably in there for some folks and was probably in there when the zoning ordinance was amended. It's not that we don't want diversity, racial diversity or economic diversity, but the way I've heard it described is there was a lot of absentee landlords who were not taking care of their property that was leading to a degrading of property values around them, and there was potential criminal activity, blah, 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 blah. So there's two possibilities. One is if and I think that the first one is less likely than the second. The first one is it's only an issue if it's a rental property. That is, you can only have an absentee landlord who's not taking care of her property if it's rental. So to the extent that we can figure out how to have some of this new higher density property be for sale, and I think that's a challenge, both because of the way the market is behaving, and we'd have to be innovative in terms of size and construction and tiny homes and modular homes and things like that. But I think to the extent that a lot of it is going to stay rental, then the question is, can you more efficiently regulate code so that folks don't get to the quote unquote absentee landlords don't get to the point where they're just not taking care of their property and it's dragging down the rest of the block. And there are some innovative strategies that cities around the country, including Atlanta, have been using to strengthen the muscle of their code enforcement activity. And specifically, and this is a longer conversation that I'm happy to have with somebody later, shifting the focus of code enforcement from clean up and board up to using code enforcement as a mechanism to flip chronically code violating properties into public ownership. So part of the issue often in cities is that the fees and fines that you have to pay if I'm a absentee landlord is often less than what it would cost to fix up the property. And there's really no other consequences. And so places around the country, including but not limited to Atlanta, have been experimenting with beefing up their fines and beefing up the consequences for chronically code violating properties, and using the liens, putting code enforcement liens on properties and using that to flip the properties into public ownership. So I think that would be an arena to explore if you really were afraid of that happening.
I see Paula has her hand raised. Do you want to answer that, Paula?
I just want to speak to one piece of it, which is the city of Decatur is a very different city than it was in the 80s, where you're talking about an incredibly vibrant downtown. You're talking about a much stronger school system. There are a multitude of differences between the mid 80s and today. But the other thing that I would say anecdotally, let's look around at the duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes that exist in our city today and look to see how many of those are actually in disrepair or absent landlords not taking care of their things. I think we're going to be really hard pressed to find that. So in the concern of what keeps us from reverting to that, I think the market pressures alone and the fact that the city just is not the same city anymore would take care of that.
Thank you, Paula. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that, or do we have any other questions?
Just to
sorry, I just wanted to ask a question. Who would decide or figure out whether code violations are happening? Is it just by visual inspection of the neighbors? I mean, how does that happen?
We have someone who does code enforcement with the city. And there's a combination of us receiving calls from other residents and just, having code enforcement kind of go and drive around and look and see if there's any violations happening.
And for what it's worth, I will say when the Affordable Housing Task Force was active, we asked for data about what kind of code enforcement activity was happening in the city. And it was, year by year, I think we looked at the last 5 years, it was 0 or like next to 0 for every year.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question. My question is, what have we learned from the policy change, the zoning policy change in 1988?
Do we have any panelists who want to weigh in on that answer?
I mean, I think there are a lot of things that we've learned since the zoning changes in 1988, one of which is that single family zoning is in itself often racially exclusionary, and it's supported in large part because of that exclusionary aspect. And I don't think we can't discount that as a component of why the zoning was changed in 1988. And so I hope that we have learned that we would like to have a racially and economically diverse community, and that we are willing to make steps to make it that way. I think we've also learned a lot. We have several city planners on this call, that city planning has changed. What it looks like to plan a vibrant city is very different. In the 1980s, we're seeing still a lot of movement towards this kind of single family suburban style, even if it's in a city kind of communities, whereas now there is much more push for that kind of vibrant, walkable, diverse in people, diverse in housing types, diverse in commercial and residential. And so I think we've learned that what people want and what makes a good quality of life is not driving out to the suburbs to live in your house and then driving over to go to work and then driving to the grocery store. But that a community is this kind of cohesive place that encompasses all of those types of places.
I think we've also learned that there is not one zoning rule cannot live forever. I think we need to be a lot more flexible in what we look at for future. We need to realize that accessory dwelling units are really popular, very feasible, right? And as we go into a phase where many of us, I know I am, are in sandwich generations, where we have kids that are aging up, parents that are aging, and we want for everyone to be close by. We need to be really flexible with whatever planning decisions we make to be equitable and flexible enough for all of our residents and the people that we want to be our new residents. So it's going to take a lot of flexibility. I don't think we should be as absolute as we have been in the past, absolute and discriminatory, obviously, but that really leads to a lot of troubles, as we've seen when we act that way.
And I want to connect Phil's question to something that Eileen talked about, a concern that came out of her group where she said, you know, that whether they felt it or they were worried that other people in the community might feel that doing this was quote unquote social engineering, because we're trying to intentionally, you know, change the makeup of our community, densify and diversify. And I guess I want to ask the question, why do we talk about social engineering only when it's about reaching for diversity? Because I would say, in response to Phil's question, that the change in 1988 from allowing multifamily housing, low density in single family zone neighborhoods was itself social engineering. It was subtle, and maybe they didn't say it out loud, but it was, and it may have been in response to existing conditions, but it was also very clearly a jab towards, we want more homeowners, we want more higher income people, and honestly, we want more white people. And that is social engineering also. It's not, it's both and, so.
Do we have any further questions? Oh, Teresa, question from Teresa.
Can't hear you.
There we are. Thank you. And goodbye. Have a good day.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
It's Jill. I didn't hear any mention about tiny homes. Is that included in this? Or, I mean, I only really heard about duplexes. What is the stance on tiny homes?
So tiny homes are definitely something that's in consideration. And I think the closest that we have of kind of a tiny home community right now is the cottage courts. The current zoning, they're allowed in RS17 and RM22 zoning. And it is something I think that can be looked at. I know that ADUs are considered tiny homes as well. So that's another place that a tiny home might function. As far as a duplex or triplex, as far as I understand, those typically aren't more of your tiny home types. Would be more of a house divided into two with a common wall, or 3 units or 4 units. Or an existing house divided. But if we looked at duplexes without the common wall, you could theoretically have 2 kind of smaller homes on a lot as well. So there are some different options out there we can look at. And some other people from the city might want to also talk a little further on that as well.
Yes, Kristen, I'll add to that. And Jill, it's a great question. So the city of Decatur, several years ago, it had on the books a minimum house size. So whenever someone wanted to construct a new home, it had to be of a minimum size, and it was quite large. I don't have it in front of me, the old zoning code, but I want to say it was at least 2,000, maybe 2,300 square feet as the minimum size. And I believe it was in 2015, maybe a couple years before that, the city eliminated the minimum floor area, the minimum size requirements. And so as it stands today, tiny homes, as small as they can be per building code, are allowed in the city, in any of our single family residential neighborhoods, just as these larger homes are permitted. But the challenge that a developer or someone who wants to build one of these tiny homes is the value of the land. It doesn't make financial sense for a builder to purchase a lot currently in the city of Decatur for what they're going for, and then build a tiny home for sale. It just doesn't pencil out for them. It may pencil out for an owner occupied, they're building it and they're gonna own it. But that is the challenge right now, is just the property values are just not penciling out for these smaller homes. And what Kristen is talking about is another building type that we allow in the city called a cottage court, and where there's multiple cottages, smaller cottages surrounding a shared green space. So that's another option that we have in the zoning code right now.
But you couldn't put 4 tiny homes on a lot today, then, is what you're saying?
That would be considered more of a cottage court, and yes, that is a potential. Yes.
And I guess my
even
concern,
now,
my concern is, again, we have this mindset that it's around the developers and it's not affordable for them. It doesn't make sense for them, and I really wish that the city would get away from that. Right? I don't really care if the developer is making money. We really need to probably focus more on what we want our community to be. And that's, I mean, it just feels like, we're making strides, but then when I hear, well, but the developer isn't going to make money and it's not cost effective for them, I feel like we need to put rules in place to make it to where the developer doesn't want to develop here and they want to go somewhere else. And we want to have a community that we're proud of.
So Jill, I am a developer. I work for a nonprofit. We only build affordable housing. And so I absolutely feel that desire to say, I don't care if a developer is making a profit. And unfortunately, in the affordable housing world, the federal government has decided that private development is the only way to build new affordable housing. There is actually a law in place that Congress passed that said you cannot build new public housing. And you can't, the government's not going to build unsubsidized housing. And so, our federal government has decided that the only way to build affordable housing is to incentivize a developer to get it. And my boss gets mad when I say this, but I would be so much happier if they would put me out of business and not pay my paycheck, because that is going to build a housing unit. But that's something that's happening at this federal level. And there is consideration right now for new legislation that would repeal those kinds of rules and look into building, new systems in place so that we're not having to incentivize a private developer to come in. Where I hesitate is that if Decatur stops building anything new, prices are just going to go up even higher. Right. And so, if we stop the increase of supply, the demand is going to still be there. The prices are still going to go up. And so there has to be a way for Decatur to find balance in that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean building a tiny home. It might mean, building these kinds of duplexes that maybe they're still not at the level of affordability that we would really like to see, but it helps make sure that, 2 police officers in a family can move into Decatur. And then also on top of that, Decatur is putting into place systems and policies like the inclusionary zoning that they just passed, so that a developer does have to take a haircut off their profit to build affordable. If you want to build anything, over 10 units, you're going to have to build some affordability into there. So I do think, it's easy for us to say we should just cut them all out. And the reality is that if we do that, the problem's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I just feel like the not stopping new build, it really has gotten us where we are today. We've allowed it. the builders figure a way around it. And, unfortunately, I almost feel, and I am a big proponent, I feel like we need to have some affordable housing. I'm very concerned that all this is rhetoric. We've heard it for years and years and years. I don't see anything with the walk behind the talk. You heard, it came out of our group, it came out of another group, stop the tear downs. And it's I don't see that that's even going to be addressed, honestly. I mean, I think the city is terrified to say that because they know they'll probably have some litigation. I get it. But we have, as a community, have got to stop letting the builders control our city.
Thank you, Jill. I just would like to put a quick plug in for, I'm the Affordable Housing Fellow for Decatur. And one of these recommendations of the task force was to start a land trust. We just incorporated that in July and working on our 501c3 status. And the city really believes this could be a viable tool, especially if some of these zoning changes are implemented in the neighborhoods to provide permanently affordable housing. So there'll be more information coming out about the land trust. We're working on a budget right now, but we do have a board of directors. And I'm personally very enthusiastic about what the land trust could accomplish as far as, like you said, trying to make Decatur the community that we want it to be. I think that's something that's of great interest to many of us.
Let me just say, Jill, that I appreciate the point you're making, and I feel your energy, and I invite you to join with the Decatur, I should say the Coalition for a Diverse Decatur and Coalition for Diverse DeKalb, or even the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights, because we are at the forefront of taking on some of these hard pressing concerns that you're raising that are community-based. And we're organizing around the concerns that we have in the community and making sure that you have a voice and that the city hears your voice and takes it very seriously and changing a lot of talk into action. And I would have to say that since I've been here, this is now my 6th year in the city of Decatur. And in those 6 years, I have seen some progress being made, but it hasn't been made without some voice that's been pretty firm and without organizing that's been direct. And we have made some progress. So I encourage you to join us and to really help make a difference, because we're starting to see progress. It's not coming fast enough, but it is progress. And I just recognize in your voice what you're saying and appreciate your input.
And for anybody who is interested in joining with the coalitions, it's diversedecatur.org or diversedecab.org. You can get connected with us. We have meetings every month.
So we're a little past 1:15 right now. Do we have any other lingering questions? Or and remember, you can also contact me directly if you need to. Okay, well, with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much again for all this thoughtful feedback. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.